The CCCR, or Centre for Creative and Cultural Research, investigates the ancient, innovative relationship between social culture and creative production. Based in the Faculty of Arts and Design at the University of Canberra, we generate scholarship and artwork in a wide array of humanities, social science, applied and creative disciplines. You are listening to a fresh presentation from the CCCR's Culture and Creativity Seminar Series. The presentation was delivered with slides. To view those slides, or to learn more about the Centre's work, please follow the links in the program notes. This podcast was recorded on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. Hi everybody, my name's Paul McGee. I'm the Director of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research here at the University of Canberra. I want to begin proceedings by acknowledging that we are on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. And I want to pay my respects to all First Nations people present today. Today's paper is by Wayne Applebee. Associate Professor Wayne Applebee is a Kamilaroi man, Indigenous cultural specialist and former member of the Galbani Circle Court. Wayne has lectured in the Faculties of Arts and Design, Health, Law and Science and Technology at the University of Canberra and is Adjunct Associate Professor with the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research. Now, I'm actually going to be reading Wayne's paper, which will be accompanied with visuals. We're going to save Wayne's voice for questions. So, Wayne's words, read by Paul McGee. Who am I on Ngunnawal country? I'm of the Kamilaroi diaspora. My circumstances result from a decision made by my grandfather over the welfare of his son Joseph, who became my father. My grandfather urged my father to leave his traditional country. My grandfather was fearful because Joseph had become a militant agitator who would often fight for his beliefs. Federally, First Nation Australians had not attained the vote and held no franchise in those days. Local authorities and the police had become concerned. Joseph was fomenting socialist communist views, espousing these to anyone who would listen. He'd been arrested and locked up on occasions for espousing those views. In those days, First Nations people had no representation. The only support came from the Australian Communist Party. Ngunnawal, the area my grandfather came from, was and still is a conservative bastion of Australia. As an Aboriginal, my father was barred from entering hotels, so he would spruik as a soapbox orator outside on the footpath. Eventually, Providence stepped in for him and his father when a job opened in Canberra. He moved to Canberra and began working on the railway. It was here in Canberra where my siblings and I were raised. Canberra was a country town of some 20,000 people and the capital of Australia. The city of Canberra was designed by Walter Burley Griffin. Griffin had won a worldwide contest to design the city and was intended to become the nation's capital and the site for the Australian Parliament. While growing up, I recall, like others, going into Civic to view the one traffic light that signalled Canberra had arrived as a city. Television would not arrive till June 1962. You'll see just there, J. Applebee. The Labor Council motion moved by J. Applebee, Wayne's father. In 1962, my father died, but not before having a noticeable impact on local politics, particularly the Trades and Labor Council and the union movement. He'd become well known for his ardent political views and was the instigator of many strikes over wages and conditions. The construction of Lake Burley Griffin, the centrepiece of Griffin's plan for Canberra, was completed in 1963, a year after my father's death. I would not see it either. Throughout that time, I was ensconced in a government institution, a boys' home. The courts had sentenced me and my brother to separate institutions for wagging school. You may wonder why I reflect on my earlier life when this is supposed to be about photographs taken on a trip to my traditional country. It is often said that the early part of one's life will affect the rest of that life. This is assuredly true in my case. Like me, many other First Nations people removed from their traditional country have missed growing up with their own community, missed the local cultural mores and knowledge that is so vital to their sense of belonging and for acceptance by their community. This sense of not belonging has often been the cause of First Nations people becoming alienated, or, as Emile Durkheim, the French sociologist, described it, anomic. Theorists post-Durkheim realised the significance of this condition for those afflicted by it, as it often led to mental health issues involving self-harm, which often led to suicide. Like most First Nations children in those days, our parents were reluctant to teach us culture. They were concerned that government authorities may take us children away for being taught it. As fate would have it, we were taken, not for practising our culture, but rather ironically for not going to school, unlike our father, who'd often been barred from attending school under the policy of exclusion on demand. In 1902, John Perry, Minister for Education, instigated exclusion on demand as official policy, ordering 2,800 government schools to apply it. First Nations children could be barred from attending school when the parents of white children objected to their being in the same room as the blacks. This policy lasted until the 1950s, while we were attending school. Over time, living in Canberra, my own identity became a conflicting question for me. Despite being First Nation, I was born and raised in the local community where there were no First Nations people. Unknown to me, there were First Nations people ensconced in missions at Yass and Tumut up until the 1970s. Today there are First Nations Australians like me who are conflicted by the same question. Who am I when living on some other First Nations country? Can I be Kamilaroi only on my traditional country? I have resolved to leave the question open and look to the reader for answers. These questions would become part of my journey back to my traditional country. I was looking for answers. How would I feel being on my traditional country? Would I be whole? Or would I feel alienated and conflicted, just as I had been living on the country I was born on, the country I was told was not mine? Some years before entering university studies, along with my wife, I had attended art classes at the Queanbeyan and TAFE. It was here I became friends with one of the teachers, a person I would meet again at the University of Canberra, where he was the manager of the Ngunnawal Centre. The Ngunnawal Centre is for First Nations people attending UC. It was while there I learnt that that person was a fellow Kamilaroi man. Terry Williams was from the same tribal nation as me, the Kamilaroi nation of the language group Gamilaroi. Terry and I became firm friends. It was at the University of Canberra that I also met Paul Collis, another First Nations mature age student. Paul was studying for his PhD. Paul's PhD concerned the question of identity, the thing that had troubled me for years. Of the many cultural mores practiced by First Nations people, one ceremony is of high importance, and that ceremony is Welcome to Country. The ceremony consists of using smoke to cleanse those preparing to enter the land of the host nation. From my research, this ceremony appears to have been developed by First Nations people travelling across the country and stopping when they reached the boundary of another nation's country. They would first light a fire to signal their presence, then wait for that nation's warriors to arrive. Had the visitors not followed this practice, there would have been a chance of attack from the traditional owners of the land. In contemporary times, hostilities have developed around the traditional smoking ceremony as to who should conduct it. The reason this is eventuated is that money has been granted to those conducting the ceremony. The local traditional people are the usual recipients of any funding for this service. Governments of various persuasions have condescended to pay for this cultural service. There is another important part to this ceremony, which is where the visitors, or delegation occupying the land of some other nation or tribe perform a traditional acknowledgement to country, a ceremony I've been doing over many years. My acknowledgement is to the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land Canberra occupies. An acknowledgement can be given by anyone, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and usually this would not be funded. There is a question about those present in the audience who are First Nations. How do they feel being bypassed in the acknowledgement ceremony? Emanating from these issues, certain questions arise for the reader, listener, to contemplate. What describes a First Nation person? How is indigeneity determined? Is blood quantum involved? What right does an Aboriginal person have on another First Nations land? Does someone who's been removed from their traditional country have a right to claim their own country? Take my case. I am Kamilaroi, owing to my father being Kamilaroi. Had my mother been First Nation, would I have been of her nation? The questions for those not fully conversant with their culture can become perplexing, as I found while conducting my thesis research. Many of those I interviewed could not answer some of these cultural questions. At the end of my lecturing career, I was invited to go to my traditional country. I'd been there on previous occasions as a small child, and late in life on 2 occasions to determine the site of my grandfather's grave. The plan for the trip was to go first to Narrabri in northern New South Wales and then to Bourke, northwest New South Wales. This was to be done with a rotation of drivers. I would not be driving either of the 2 cars. At first, I was a backseat driver with Wayne Knight. The first driver of the hire car was Paul McGee, a professor from the University of Canberra. I met Paul while I worked there as a student. Paul is not First Nation. After Paul McGee, it was Wayne Knight's turn to drive. Wayne, like Paul Collis, is a Barkindji man. I had never met him before, and there we have Wayne in the photo. As you might expect, the conversation moved slowly at first. After a while, we gelled. Let us say he had been to places of a similar kind to me. A not unusual fact for most First Nations men, given most First Nations men have had encounters with police and the law. As of the 30th of June 2024, the year of our travels to my country, 14,270 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and 1,605 women made up 36% of Australia's prison population. Being slightly over 3% of Australia's population, this is a horrific statistic. Sadly, we remain the most incarcerated Indigenous group in the entire world. Wayne Knight had prior knowledge of where I'd been locked up as a child. This had been related to him by Paul Collis, who had been a teacher there many years after I'd been released. Wayne also knew Mount Penang through his relations, who were fellow survivors. Mount Penang has undoubtedly left indelible marks on the minds of those who survived the place. Wayne told me of his uncles who awaited my arrival in Bourke, wanting to meet a fellow inmate of Mount Penang, a fellow survivor. While discussing Mount Penang, I had visions of the football fields and the bowling greens I'd worked on, and of the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sex abuse. I thought of the pedophile creatures that crawled and slithered through these places. The former superintendent of Mount Penang, who was also the Gosford Mayor, Laurie Mayer, has been acquitted of 6 charges, but 2 are still remaining. Mayer arrived long after I'd left. Many of those institutionalised would be awarded compensation for their time in places like Mount Penang. Eventually, now back in the car on the trip, Wayne and I finished talking about Mount Penang. Like the dream time, I settled back in the seat. Visions came to my mind as we navigated through the country. For me, the country is like a past life experience. I am comfortable here. I can relate to these visions of my dreaming. In this photograph, Terry Williams, the proud Kamilaroi man who Wayne mentioned earlier, Terry Williams explains to an already knowledgeable audience the protection and maintenance of this and other important cultural artefacts. The photo depicts a shield, as it is much too large for a coolamon. Coolamons were used to carry items such as babies and bush tucker. Various other items were often carried on the head when travelling long distances. When used to carry bush tucker on the head, a ring pad called an arente, which was made of possum fur, human hair, twisted coiled grass or feathers, was used. The photograph depicted is one where the bark has been removed to make a shield. Bark shields and those made from wood were used to fend off weapons and spears. The importance of the protection of these sites cannot be underestimated. These trees in the past were called by the white man dendroglyphs. This refers to trees that have been carved. Other terms include arboroglyphs and silverglyphs. This photograph depicts the scars left after a coolamon has been excised, which, as described previously, was mainly used by First Nations women. This photograph had me conflicted. Even though it was explained to me that these trees had been carefully cut to remove the bark to train people how to do it correctly, there is a problem in my view. My concerns relate to the original trees being confused in time with the trees cut in more recent times. Some of the original trees are measured in hundreds of years previous to the white man's arrival. This is a tree that would have taken perhaps 50 to 100 years to form the spiral. For those less well informed, this may appear to be just a tree that has been turned by the wind. The significance of these trees is not apparent to most people, not informed as to First Nations culture. This is a significant tree, owing to the fact that it has been extensively modified. This would be a tree on a songline. Auntie Rhonda Ashby is a Kamilaroi woman. She is worried significant culturally modified trees are disappearing due to agricultural expansion. Vandalism has done more damage than agricultural expansion even. In the photograph below, we have the repatriation of a significant scar tree that was involved in the death ritual of an important Kamilaroi man. The photograph speaks to the problem of the desecration of our important First Nations artefacts. Wayne, Paul, Terry and I had reached the summit of Mount Kaputar after a long, rather perilous climb. The journey had been over sealed road in parts and unsealed loose gravel in others. In most places, steep cliffs fell way down the mountain for hundreds of metres, causing me to reflect on the mammoth journey climbing this 1,489 metre mountain must have been for my people. The journey up the mountain was one that had your attention the whole time, as around every corner was the possibility of another car on a road that had barely enough room for our car. So narrow was the road we had to stop to allow other cars room to pass. On a couple of occasions, the cars coming down the mountain had barely enough room. It was equally the same going up, when some cars were forced to stop and manoeuvre backward and forward to be able to pass. Mount Kaputar is the centre of country. It is here where one feels the power. This is Kamilaroi country. Long before the invaders arrived, we were here, where the dreaming stories came to life. Even now, one can feel the power all around. It is little wonder it is central to our songlines. Mount Kaputar was the provider, a great source of food, weapons, medicines, shelter. Right across this mountain, there are reminders of the importance of this place. Paintings, carvings, grooves in the rocks where weapons were sharpened. This was more than a mountain. This is where Bayami, the Kamilaroi sky god, is. Bayami and his wife. Birangnulu?
Do your best.
Birangnulu, the fertility goddess, and Bayami are here, along with their son, Daramalum. Long before Major Thomas Mitchell, Surveyor General of New South Wales, came to see the splendour of this now national park, the Kamilaroi had long ago made this country their own. In this photograph, I'm following Terry Williams on the path to a sacred site. If you look closely, you can see Terry's shoes between my legs. In this photograph, we have reached the site, which opens out to a clearing where ceremonies were conducted. Terry, a knowledge holder, explains the significance of this particular site. This photograph, while not correctly focused, shows the remains of the volcanic lava cone. I imagined the many eyes that have looked at this over time. As is their way, the white man named this country to deny the original people ownership. It got called Mount Mitchell after Major Thomas Mitchell, the Surveyor General, who passed this country in 1832. But somehow it doesn't matter. Naming it doesn't take away the fact that the Kamilaroi stood atop this volcanic ridge thousands of years before Mitchell and looked out and saw storm clouds forming far off in the distance and waited for the thunder to arrive. Eons ago, a black man stood and watched the lightning flash. This is Kamilaroi country. My ancestors are here. Paul comforts Terry as we discussed what has happened to various places on the mountain. I'm standing looking out over country, standing here, tears welling in my eyes. Shortly I move away from my comrades to a visitor's dais that projects out over the edge of the mountain, built for the visitors to view the majestic sights of my country. Standing there, I look out. I am in another place, another time. I'm looking back into Kamilaroi history. A lump forms in my throat. Jealously, I wish to be alone, to travel back in time to days past. My comrades are eager to see how this affects me. I cannot speak at first. I quickly find my composure. Brilliant is the only word I have. Moving now, I look up to the mountain that towers above me. I am like an ant to this mountain. A certain melancholy invades me. I may never see this mountain again. This picture took me away to another time and place, long before the intervention of the white man. We are looking at countless of millions of years of erosion. While it may appear close, it is a long way from where we are situated. While journeying around the mountain, Terry calls via radiophone to a fellow Kamilaroi man, who together with his son have built by hand hundreds of lineal metres of tracks to important sites all around Mount Kaputar. In this photograph, we see Terry Williams describing the work involved in building these tracks by his countrymen and son. Soon we were on the way back to Narrabri. Prior to leaving the area, Terry took us to a scar tree that was centuries old. Somehow, this journey to Mount Kaputar reminded me of another return journey. I remembered returning to Canberra upon my release from Mount Penang Boys' Home. Coming into Canberra through Fishwick on the train, I looked across toward Black Mountain. I was shocked to see the two giant communications masts sticking up high into the sky. The smaller one, I learned later, was CTC-7 and the other was the ABC mast. Black Mountain was called Galambari, a Ngunnawal name, a place I had visited as a child. I knew it was a significant site to the local First Nations people. It was a sacred men's initiation site. In my childhood, it had been desecrated by the authorities when they had used it as a rubbish tip. Canberra had grown while I'd been away. As a child, I had swum the Molonglo River down behind the powerhouse. Now it was gone. Where was the sleepy town I had left? Here in this photograph, now back in Narrabri, Terry explains the totemic significance of these totem poles. Again on the same site, Terry discusses how this particular location was where the local Kamilaroi people had been forced to live. This site is located right adjacent to the Namoi River that runs close to the town of Narrabri. The Namoi has a significant spiritual connection to the people, which comes from the fact that it emanates from Mount Kaputar. The Namoi River catchment area is all around the mountain, signifying how important this mountain was to Kamilaroi people. Kamilaroi stories locate Bayami and his wife Birangulu, the fertility goddess, on this mountain. Spiritually, all life's needs are catered for by the Namoi, Mount Kaputar and country. This photograph shows typical Kamilaroi country. Flat, unending vistas, off into the distance as far as one can see. Time is slow here. It is usually measured in the distance one can walk. Kamilaroi time is the time the journey takes. I envisage my journey back to country. In this photograph, we have reached my friend Paul Collis's country. Here we are standing on a dock, looking at a spectacular sunrise. This is Barkindji country, Paul's country. We had arrived early in the morning to see possibly the most important thing to Barkindji people, the Darling River. Leaning on the safety rail with Paul, I sense a certain sadness, a place that time long ago passed by. It is a place where time has slowed to a crawl. There is little work here. Most people have long ago left. The only entertainment is the local club, where games nights keep people entertained. Still, there is a deep history here. But that's Paul's country and his story. On leaving Barkindji country, we drove past literally hundreds of goats that have proliferated to extraordinary numbers, along with huge numbers of feral pigs. They were close by the road as we drove. And this is Byrock, heading to the outskirts of Barkindji and on the way back to Canberra. While on the road back from Narrabri, Mount Kaputar and Bourke, I reflected on an earlier trip to Ngunnawal several years previously and how I searched the cemetery for my grandfather's grave but was unable to locate it. I was determined to find the gravesite. I'd sought funding from the University of Canberra's Collaborative Indigenous Research Initiative, CIRI, to find the grave. The submission proved successful, so with the money CIRI provided, Paul Collis and I set out to find it. My grandfather died during the war in 1942. To expedite things, I'd been in contact with the Ngunnawal Historical Society to get a plan of the gravesite. It duly arrived and showed clearly where the gravesite was located. Paul and I arrived in Ngunnawal and eventually set about finding the grave. Just like my earlier search, we spent hours searching but never located it. We'd been fully funded to locate this gravesite, but after some hours searching, the graves could still not be found. We travelled a different route to Kamilaroi country on that earlier trip, through country that had been wholly introduced to the farmer's plough. Off in every direction, we saw neat rows of endless lines of tilled soil, just like an orange after the zest had been taken from the peel. This was not the scary experience of my childhood, the rugged bushland where the trees hid peering eyes and dark silhouettes. For Paul and me, the land reminded us of the Jurassic Mesozoic era. We discussed the mean lights we had seen there as children, two Koori men remembering long ago stories of their childhood. At other times on the road back from the trip to see Terry and Narrabri, Mount Kaputar and Bourke, my mind would drift between the trips back to my father's country and yet other times to the horrors of St Heliers Musselbrook or Mount Penang, an old man on perhaps his last journey. The thought occurred to me that many Aboriginal people were never actually buried in consecrated ground. As in earlier Australian history, they were considered heathens by the populace. I knew my father had attended grandfather's funeral, but sadly my father died in 1961. He must have been buried within the cemetery at the time of the funeral. Otherwise my father would have said something. In addition, the map of the graveyard clearly had his gravesite marked. According to the custom of those times, First Nations people were invariably located in the Chinese section of the ceremony, as both groups were considered less than by the rest of the Australian society. As has been well documented, Chinese people had been ill-treated right across Australia in earlier times. My mind was cast to the anti-Chinese riots on the goldfields at Lamming Flat, now Young, in December 1860. This was an example of the orchestrated violence against Chinese miners. So bad was the violence, and to stop more of it, the government introduced a series of discriminatory laws aimed at controlling the number of Chinese immigrants entering the country. After we both searched every possible section of the cemetery, including the Chinese section, we came to the conclusion he wasn't there. Considering the grave issue, I concluded that it was of little use disputing the map or where the grave was. The names near grandfather's grave didn't exist either. I considered contacting the Ngunnawal Historical Society, but thought better of it when I considered the likely outcome. They could tell me anything, or say it was actually another grave. 83 years had passed since he was buried. I reflected that it would have been good to have sat by his grave and talked of how I would have liked to have met him. Now that would never happen. I would only know him through 2 old photographs. As was the case with the earlier journey with Paul Collis to find grandfather's grave, the trip home from this most recent trip to Kamilaroi country was mainly uneventful. The trip home to Canberra. Home is what I call it. I hold no rights, even though I have grown up here, because I am Kamilaroi. But now I knew where home was, on Ngunnawal country. It is not my country, but still I call it home.
Thank you. I'm open for questions if you want to question me.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks so much, Wayne. Those words are unbelievably powerful, and I couldn't believe how you could pack into that the movement between so many places and time periods, and it was just very impactful. So thank you so much for sharing. And Paul, you did an amazing job at delivery, so thank you for that as well. Wayne, just so grateful for everything that you've shared with us at the university over the years that you've been here and with everyone that's here. But I wanted to ask you specifically about the scar trees. And you, in the paper, you talked about, I think, that the trees might have been uncomfortable or it might have disrupted the sense of time, the new scarring
Correct,
of the trees.
yes.
Yeah, and I was really interested to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Please.
No problem. What it is, it's that these have only just been recently carved out, and that would conflict with, in time, probably 50, 100 years, they would appear as if they were traditional, which they're not. They were taught to people how to do it. I'd rather see those things done somewhere else, not on traditional country. If it was done in town somewhere where people could practice that, that's fine. But if it's on traditional country, that's distorting the view people might have of those trees. They're not traditional. Okay?
Yeah, thank you so much for your generosity in sharing all of that story. I was interested to hear that, just a quick reference to having visited your grandfather's country when you were a boy, and I wondered if you'd say some more about that.
Yeah, okay. What happened was my father would take us back there, but I think we only ever went one time. I remember the trip, it was in an old Bedford panel van without any windows in the back. There was a whole heap of kids in the back. What I remember of it when we got there was all dirt roads just about everywhere. The street where my grandmother lived had a huge tree, and that tree is what I remember the place by. When I went back there the second time as an adult, it wasn't there. It had sort of cut out the vision that I had of the place. But the trip when I went back to the grave, that was as an adult, probably about 5 or 10 years before I went with Paul Collis, and I couldn't find the grave anywhere. I searched high and low, did everything possible to find it, but couldn't find it. What I was concerned about is that I actually believe in those times Aboriginal people may have appeared to have been buried in that cemetery, but after you're gone, you wouldn't be actually interned there. And that's what I think's happened, because all of the graves on that paperwork weren't there. I looked everywhere, so did Paul. We couldn't find any of them. So they didn't exist. So what I think's happened, he was buried somewhere else, not where well, what my father would have seen is him being buried in that cemetery, but in fact he wasn't there. Does that make sense? Thanks. Yeah.
Jen.
It's really more of a comment, and I've had the privilege of knowing you for a long time and hearing some of those stories, but the story about the graveyard made me think about how slippery graves can be. I mean, I spent a month at Hill End looking for the Aboriginal and Chinese cemetery, which was on the maps. Every day I went out for a month, couldn't ever find it. I spent 2 days walking around the cemetery island in Venice looking for Ezra Pound's grave, and it's on the map, I couldn't find it. And I think in Ezra Pound's case, he would not want to be found by somebody who despised his politics. So I think he probably just hid it. But there's a number of others. We don't know where my father's buried. We buried him. We don't remember where it was, somewhere in Johannesburg. And I think the graves do their own thing. I think certainly there's a lot of, obviously, institutional investment in hiding people you don't think, that you don't care about or don't want to be seen. Because the Hill End graveyard was certainly there and certainly gone. And your dad and his companions likewise. But I do think I don't believe in anything spooky. I don't have any sense of another world. But sometimes it comes up and hits you anyway. And I think maybe that might be the case.
I'm sort of nonplussed by it. Of my whole life, I thought about him. He, to me, is something special. Very different sort of person. I knew a lot about his life. He's like, I talk about dreaming. He's part of my dreaming. In a sense, now I know that I can't find him. It's not really overpowering me. It's now I've come to grips with it, and I put it like, this is what white fellas have done to us. I'm not the only one. There'll be thousands of others like me. And in a way, it keeps me alive to hit back at them. Just by telling you my story, I'm doing something for other Aboriginal people. I'm sorry about my voice, but it's the best I can do.
Delphine. Yep, you're beaming in.
Excellent, thank you, deadly brother. So first of all, just as a Ngunnawal woman, I'd like to say that as a Ngunnawal nation, and we understand that policy is made on this country that is actually sent out to the rest of the nations. And we appreciate and we adore and we love people like you, and we respect the time and the education that you bring to this nation. It improves and grows our nation and shows government our power and our voice as a peoples. Thank you for sharing your journey on Ngunnawal Nations. My heart wept seeing Lake Burley Griffith empty, because when it was filled, it actually meant desecration of some of our artefacts.
True.
In relating to cemeteries, my ears kind of pricked up, because being from our mob from Brungle, there's actually 3 cemeteries. There's the one you know now, and there's an old one that my mother talks about that has my great-great-grandparents and my great-great-grandparents. But then there's a 3rd one that they kind of know, but they don't yarn about much. So even I'm thinking, and maybe we can have a yarn later, is about the fact of they kind of listed people were buried there, but they weren't actually put in that cemetery. And just the last thing, thank you for sharing the story, because I actually grew up in Wairui. I grew up on the Central Coast. My mum would tell me stories about Penang and what happened up there. And so thank you. It was very powerful, and thank you for brave for sharing the stories, Wayne.
Thank you.
And just want to say thank you, Kadri, and thank you for showing Terry Williams. Terry is also very important in my life. He's an amazing teacher, an amazing human. But thank you, Kadri. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Well done, Wayne. What an amazing paper. Well written and beautifully delivered. The photographs are stunning, aren't they? I remember when you walked away, I went to the other end. Looking back to Barkington country from there, it was amazing. I wanted to jump off. I felt like I could fly. I wished I'd jumped off. That mountain is above where we were, is the initiation ground. It would be a hard climb to get from there, where we were, hard enough to get to there in a car. So imagine the strength of those Ngunnawal people that walked that, and would have walked through there as well. So, incredible people, tall and strong like you, most of them that I've known. The search for your grandfather was heartbreaking. In the 1955 floods, in the Darling River, all that Burke area was floodplain, right up into Queensland. The cemetery went under, a lot of Aboriginal and Chinese graves. The bodies were only 2 feet in the ground, not 6 feet. They didn't bury them all the way down. Those bones were washed away in the flood. Up against the fence they were all found. Then my grandmother, his baby Dorothy was one of the washed away bones. Was told to come down and pick their people's bones out of the pile on the fence. Where your grandfather was supposed to be buried, it's not far from the river. I've heard that after dark, people came back and take those bodies, throw them in the river. I did write a poem that came from that time. But I wrote it after the Voice referendum was turned down. All that work that we've done here as teachers, sharing, we've gone backwards. This country's gone backwards. In so much as Aboriginal voice is not known or not wanted to be known. There are a lot of young people that do not support that no vote. But there's so many bastards that said, yes, we don't want it. We don't want black voice in Parliament. We don't want to hear truth telling. And I think the truth telling is necessary for all of us, black voice, healing, not designed to attack the sense of heart or shame or something in those families that have been involved in denial of Aboriginal people and others, not just to cause harm, but there's a healing to be done for us in that truth telling. And your paper is so beautifully written. Like Jen said, very poetic. There's lots of poetics throughout your voice, all the way through it. I just want to say thank you, brother. It's been a great journey.
Yeah, Rick.
Hi Wayne, that was an amazing journey Thank you for sharing that with us. You might not be able to answer my question, but I was just curious because you call Canberra your home. It's how you feel it as your home. I was curious if you feel it stronger that it's your home when you're in it or when you're away from it.
Good question. Yeah, look, I actually mentioned this to Paul when we came back from searching for the grave. Not the most recent trip, the one before, and how it felt as soon as I seen the Black Mountain Tower, you feel like you're home. And this will never be my traditional home, but it's what I call home now. My real country, I don't think I could be comfortable there either, because me and Paul took a trip to find that grave, and when we went there, Aboriginal people were treated like shit. And everything about the place told you you weren't welcome. And I know that I could never be comfortable in that place. But here, I don't have my full rights as an Aboriginal person because I'm living on someone else's country. That wouldn't affect most people here. It does, that diaspora thing, what it does, it takes away your rights as soon as you're removed from country. And I would not be welcome back there trying to claim country or belong there, because I don't belong there. I was born here. So that's why I asked that question, where would home be? What do you think home would be for me? I don't have one. I reside here. This is not home. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Wayne, I might ask you one, just following what you just said to Rick. How representative do you think your history is in your relation to place of Aboriginal people in this part of Australia more generally?
What's happened, most people are the diaspora now. Most people don't live on traditional country. Somehow, Paul and I and other people living on Ngunnawal country have to make concessions, and it does affect us because we're asked constantly about culture, but we have to actually defer to Ngunnawal people to really speak about culture. Like when I start to lecture here, I had to get permission from the Ngunnawal people to actually lecture about my culture. So there's problems here that need to be sorted. I can't see an easy solution for it though. It is problematic for anyone like me if you're here as a lecturer in particularly what I do, talk about culture, because I'm on someone else's land doing it. It's a problem. They were kind enough to condescend to allow me to teach my culture here at this university. So I'm thankful to the Ngunnawal people and Ngambri for allowing me to do that.
So Jen has just asked when Wayne is going to publish this presentation.
Oh, do you want me to publish it? Go for it, yes. No worries. I'll talk to you after. Definitely. Jan Webb, I'm always indebted to her because she acted as my primary supervisor. Forever grateful for her doing it. Always grateful. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll finish up there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.